Hello all. So this is going to be the beginning of week 6, and as I'll have announced soon, I haven't done it yet actually, but by the time you're watching this, presumably I'll have announced there isn't going to be any new content for um, week 6. So to a certain extent, this is going to be a double-edged sword. So on the one hand, I can imagine you all saying, yes, like less work. And that's somewhat true, right? So there'll be less readings, and you won't have any writing, weekly writing or quiz. But of course, you have a paper due. And why I say it's a double-edged sword is because this sort of entails that there's a higher expectation for your papers. So we have a full week in which I'm going to spend time going over the prompt, kind of laying out my expectations, trying to demonstrate good writing or at least give you a sort of outline so that you can be successful. And because you should be dedicating like 20 hours a week to this course, that means you have all of that time where you don't have to do readings, you don't have to study for the quiz, towards honing your paper. So that, in conjunction with the fact that it's going to be a fairly short paper, I think I'm even going to reduce it to a 5-page expectation as opposed to 6, means that this should be a polished piece of writing. And while it's only week 4, while I'm recording this, hopefully you've already begun. So I guess one way or another, it'll work itself out. So with that in mind, I'm going to first go over the prompt today, and then in later days I'll go over things like what are sort of expectations in philosophy, or what are just sort of good writing strategies, and I'll put up some maybe documents that'll be helpful towards that end. So this week is dedicated towards a writing workshop. So please keep these tools in mind and try to follow some of the lessons that I'll be giving, because it'll be important for your success in this course that you heed these sorts of considerations that I'm going to offer. So at this point, if you want to pull up, just pause the video and pull up your prompts, the prompts that are in the final assignment or in the assignment tab on Scholar. I'm just going to go over those. So because I don't have that software, I can't show it on the screen, but this will just be like any other sort of lecture hall where you have a copy of your own and you can look at it and read along while I read along with my personal copy. So I'm just going to pull up a copy that on my laptop that you can't see, and I'll just continue talking while I go over the various prompts in order. So I think this will be helpful insofar as maybe it'll give you a bit more direction than what's already explicit in the prompt. And of course I'll send out an email specifying some conditions like the 5-page word limit and that sort of thing. So first thing, I chose this broad topic, the first prompt, because a lot of people seem interested in the contrast between rationalists and empiricists, and it is an interesting contrast. The only thing that I have to warn about this is that it is very general. So if you don't already have a sense of the sorts of questions that I'm asking, or what would be reasonable answers, or a good solid grasp of the material, I don't recommend this one, because this is going to require you to synthesize weeks worth of material in the appropriate sorts of ways that I can't dictate for you step by step, because that would just be a huge prompt. So I'll read it out and then see if any important thoughts come to mind. I wrote some down, but sometimes things spring up. So Hume maintains that all ideas are derived from impressions. This may be taken as the view that sense experience is the basis of all knowledge. Explain this claim and account for how it applies to all knowledge, namely matters of fact and relations of ideas. Note if there are any exceptions. So this sort of explain this claim and how it accounts for all knowledge is significant, and I've only briefly covered it in the Hume writing, although I did. To a certain extent, relations of ideas are thought to be things that are a priori, right, independent of experience. Mathematics or geometry or conceptual truths or logic don't depend on experience. is what we traditionally say. But why might Hume think that they do? So they do insofar as relations of ideas are still manipulation of ideas, and where do ideas come from at the end of the day? Right. So, and then the contrast case is Descartes. So on the other hand, Descartes maintains that senses are not reliable and we can only gain knowledge through reason. On what ground does he doubt the senses? So this will primarily be you recounting the first two arguments from Meditation 1. Are these good arguments? So this is going to be formal argument evaluation that you should already be well prepared for. I've already given you these arguments, so this shouldn't be too hard of a task, honestly. But are they valid? Are they sound? Are they inductively strong? What sorts of arguments are they? And then what motivates his preference for reason over the senses? So what's the general project, and why does he say that we shouldn't trust the senses, right? That sort of general view. And then finally, argue in favor of one of these two views by providing an original argument in favor of the superior view on your account, or by objecting to the opposing view. So this is going to have to be a significant part of your paper. Even if you do all of these other, and this is a general comment that applies to all of the prompts, even if you do all of this sort of recitation stuff perfectly, if you don't have an original contribution that's well thought out, well argued, clearly stated, it's basically impossible to get above a B. Basically, the excellent papers, A-range papers, require you to be doing independent thought. So just keep that in mind. There should be a considerable portion of your paper, maybe the last quarter to the last third, last quarter probably is sufficient, dedicated to you arguing in some novel way for or against one of these views. And I have no preference. It's really just a matter of making a good case. You can make a good case for Descartes if you bring up some thought I've never thought of before. That's awesome. Okay, so with that said, we'll move on to the more narrow prompts. So there's the prompt on Hume, and this is specifically regarding the problem of induction. So in section 5 of his inquiry, Hume presents what he calls a skeptical solution to the doubts concerning human understanding, which he put forward in section 4. So the doubts concerning human understanding is what we now call the problem of induction. Write an essay in which you carefully explain the nature of Hume's doubts. So this will be a recitation of the problem of induction. So this includes an explanation of relations of ideas, matters of fact, where matters of fact are derived from, and why Hume thinks that neither relations of ideas nor matters of fact can justify inferences about cause and effect. So I pretty much laid it out for you what you're going to do. I presented the argument in the form of a dilemma. So neither relations of ideas nor matters of fact can justify cause and effect. And so there seems to be no rational grounds. But really explain all of the details. Why does he think cause and effect is only a matter of fact, and why is it not a relation of idea? And so all those sorts of steps. And then after you've clearly explained that, address his solution. What is his solution? Is it adequate? So this is where you start to do your independent evaluation. And then are there better solutions to the skeptical doubts? So can you think of any other grounds, maybe probability, maybe pragmatic justification, maybe there's some other way? And I can give you secondary sources if you're interested. Just ask me and I can give you oodles of people have been writing for hundreds of years on this problem now. So if you want to engage with some secondary sources, those are definitely up for the taking. Maybe I'll just post them. And then moving on to 3, according to Descartes, how do we know about our mind and about bodies? So this is going to be covering meditation 2. How are the mind and body related to one another? What do we know of the mind better than the body according to Descartes? What are some strengths of this view? What are some weaknesses? Ultimately, is it a tenable view? So this is asking you to first present and make sense of his sort of mind-body dualism, and then to evaluate it as to whether it's a good argument or not. And so I think in some ways it'll be too easy to evaluate the major weaknesses, considering most of you are probably, relatively science-oriented sorts of folks. But I do think this view does have some strengths, so do give a fair shot at giving some of the strengths their due diligence, because there are reasons why this was a reasonable view for a great mind such as Descartes to hold. And so either you have to argue for why this is a tenable position, namely mind-body dualism. Why is mind-body dualism tenable? And if not, what do you suggest? You suggest that just starting to consider what is the mind in relation to the body. So any original thought will do. I don't expect you to do something absolutely revolutionary, because this is a big field with a lot of problems. But if what you say makes sense, that's going a far way. Of course, when I say makes sense, it can't just be a sort of casual reflection or opinion. It does need to be a rigorous argument, and that's one of the things I've been trying to stress the whole time in this course. But it will definitely come through in the papers more than anything else. There's a lower bar for the weekly writings because they're frequent than the final paper. The final paper really needs to be a rigorous argument. Yes. And then the one that I selected for week 4 is Edmund Gettier maintains that justified true belief is not sufficient. It's not a sufficient condition for knowledge, right? He says that you can have all 3 of those conditions, justification, truth, and belief in a statement, and it still doesn't seem like it's knowledge. He gives an argument for it, and he gives a couple of cases for it, and then I gave a separate case. And so you have to evaluate how he does that. And when you reconstruct his argument, it would be really nice if you did it formally, if you laid out premises and conclusions and found and made it valid. In a certain extent, I think this is a pretty easy argument to render, so that's why I kind of expect it in this case. If you want help, email me. Further, provide a novel example to illustrate his point. So he gives 2 examples, I gave a separate example, and I'm sure once you understand the general pattern, this is just you exemplifying your understanding. It shouldn't be too difficult. And then, does this objection have historical precedence? So if you've done all the week's reading, you should be able to answer that question. And then, so briefly compare and contrast how the various authors approach this problem, if any other authors approach it at all. And then finally, like every other prompt, you're expected to evaluate whether or not Gettier's objection is good, whether or not you think this account undermines knowledge, or if we still have knowledge and we can still make sense of knowledge with justified true belief, or with justified true belief and maybe one other condition that you thought of, and just that sort of thing. And then rather than having you providing a week 5 prompt, I decided to just leave it as is, and you can either create your own week 5 one or pick another topic. And I didn't do week 5 largely because I hope you're not starting your papers that week, because it's a little late. But honestly, I'm totally open to this option. The only thing is that it requires you to be a little bit more responsible. So you have 4 days from now. I sent out the email, sort of already talking about this some time ago. So you've had time from then as well. But this is a completely live option, because if something else interests you more, you're going to do a better job. It'll be a topic that sparks your imagination, and you'll be more willing and capable of putting in the hours you need to make a good paper. So if anything does interest you, approach me about it. Say, here's my rough outline. Where can I improve? What sort of problems have I not addressed that need to be addressed? And I'll help you try to construct a good outline for some sort of reasonable paper. But number 5 is totally a live option as well. So thanks for your time, and sorry for the boring format, but at least this was relatively short, and I will post additional supplemental material to help you out with your writing soon. Okay, thanks, bye.